mentioned in the recounting. I'm not sure exactly what he's going to talk about, except that he was at Pearl when it first happened, so he'll go from there. It's all yours.
Okay, thank you. Lucky my uniform, rather tight, but I snuggle into it, and it, yeah, I'll put that on. And it makes it a little bit more authentic, I suppose, to wear a uniform when you make a presentation of this type. And when your history class or any class in school approaches that portion of the curriculum where you arrive at some famous point in history, it's great to have an eyewitness who was there to tell you about actually what happened. It makes it a little bit more impressive and gives you a little more interest in history. I generally do not use any notes, and I welcome your questions, and I hope you do have some. I'm going to allow you about at least 10 minutes for questions. I'm going to attempt to follow some notes for about the first 5 minutes, and then we'll be ad-libbing more or less. But Pearl Harbor, of course, as you all are familiar, I'm certain, is in Hawaii, about 7 miles from Honolulu. It is perhaps the most beautiful and well-protected harbor in the world. Not for an anchorage, but for protection against the sea, and all the ships in Pearl Harbor, which is a small harbor relatively, but every ship would be tied up. They wouldn't be anchored so they could swing around the anchor because there wasn't any room. It was a relatively small harbor, but they had many, many ships in there, and they were all tied up to something, either to each other or to alongside of a pier for either repairs or supplies or what have you. A little bit about the situation, the political world situation at that time. Several years before, in 1939, Germany and most of the countries of Europe went to war. Russia and England and France and the Netherlands and Holland and all except Italy practically went to war, and they were all battling against Germany. This had gone on for several years, as I say. In fact, in 39, and December of 41 is just about the end of that year. So the world situation was bad. We were in a state of emergency. The military was in a state of emergency. They would not let anybody out of the service, but they were taking people in like mad, and we were trying to train them. I had 4 years in at the time. In fact, my enlistment had expired on November 29th, just a week before Pearl Harbor. And I did not re-enlist. I wanted to get out and go to college. But they would not let me out as long as you were in or not in the continental limits of the United States. And at that time, of course, Hawaii was not a state. So I was stuck there aboard the ship. And at the time, this national emergency would, at various times, give us a little warning. Something might happen. Something might happen, you know. But there was absolutely no indication of anything really happening. Well, they'd say, keep your eyes open, or something to that effect. And the bunch of, I call them dunderheads in Washington, which we had then, which a great deal of them we have right now, who the minute they get into office, their primary concern is not for the interest of the United States, but in getting reelected time after time after time. And this is their primary effort. It was so at the time. My division officer even told me, he said, Bill, how about getting going here and making some rates? He said, you have the ability and so forth. I said, I'm interested, I'm happy you're interested in my welfare, but I'm going to get out and I'm going to go to college and have my career on the outside in civilian life. He said, we're going to be in this war, you know that very well. I said, oh, I don't think so. But there were many indications. Our Admiral Richardson, came back, a special trip from Washington. Now, he was what we call SINPAC, Commander-in-Chief, Pacific Fleet. Came back to Washington on a special trip to talk to President Roosevelt and tell him what was going to happen. If we did not have more funds to keep the ships out of port, to keep them operating, which is very expensive, keeping the fleet at sea. But at sea, the fleet is safe, relatively safe, compared to being in a harbor. And he explained what would happen. What does President Roosevelt do? He fired him on the spot. He fired him, and he made the remark to the newsmen, he talks too much. And in fact, I wrote a letter to my sister, which she still has in California, and explained what was liable to happen anytime. But still, we got no warnings. And what really put the frosting on the cake was that they had, and we didn't know this at the time, of course, they had broken the Japanese code, their military codes, sometime before this ever happened. So they knew definitely, absolutely definitely, that something was going to happen militarily in the Pacific on December 7th. President Roosevelt sent a telegram, a regular telegram, which at that time took about a day and a half to get to Hawaii. He didn't send it over short wave, so they got it immediately. He didn't send it during a working day. He sent it on a day, not a working day, when most of the military is off. So actually it was a setup by our own president. This certainly didn't make us happy, we survivors who had to go on and fight the war for the rest of the period. Okay. On December 7th, as I say, it was as big a surprise as if someone walked in here right this moment with a machine gun and started shooting, and you saw blood spurting out of some of your friends and they're falling over. You would say, ha ha, this is a setup. Mr. Bailey had that all arranged, and he had some people doing, you know, all arranged. You would say that's what's going on. You could not remotely believe it. This was what happened to us. We were sitting there, tied up in rows. All the big battleships were tied up in rows. This is about 100 yards. This is the entrance to the harbor, which was protected by submarine nets. In here was Ford Island, in here just a small island, but they had a naval air base there. This was their landing field, and they had their naval air base was there. All of the battles, not all of them, but most of the battleships were tied up here. The Nevada was here, the Arizona was here, Tennessee was here, and we were tied up beside the Tennessee. The Maryland was here, and the Oklahoma was here, directly ahead of us. There was another one over here, the California, and there was one over in Dry Dock over here, and some other ships. But this whole harbor was loaded with ships tied up together, anchored at buoys. There were ships over here, at a dock, here, all the way along over in here. And this is a closed harbor, as I say, protected by submarine nets. On this morning, about 6:30, one of our destroyers out here in the harbor someplace, outside of Pearl, dropped some depth charges on a submarine. Of course, they notified the powers that be. At the time, they always had some duty officers on board, but the Admiral and all of his staff and everybody, they were ashore out at Waikiki Beach, or maybe still sleeping at that time. They thought, can't be. Must have been dropping them on a whale or something. Sometimes you get a similar sound with your sounding gear from a whale or a big fish, or even a sunken ship or something. So they said, it can't be. Can't be. But they claimed this destroyer, the Ward, they claimed they sunk this, a submarine out there, which certainly should not have been there, and they knew it wasn't one of ours. But it didn't get any further than that. False alarm type of thing. I was standing on my ship. Now this is a drawing which I made. I was standing clear out on the forecastle, almost on the tip. Now this ship is 600 feet long, 624 feet, and 100 feet wide, which is, what, 2-3 times as wide as this room, I suppose. I was standing out here, and all the way from here, all the way back through here, I would say there were maybe 300 sunbathers. All they had on was swimming trunks, sunbathing. I wanted to go ashore and go out to Waikiki Beach. I was looking for someone to take my duty because I had the duty, and I had to find someone of equal rank who rated going ashore, and we would swap duties. So I was stepping over these people out on the deck and standing up about here, and all of a sudden I saw some planes coming in. I maybe saw them 2-3 miles away. And they came in, swooped down. I thought, uh-oh, here goes an exercise of some kind. We were always having drills of various kinds, emergency drills, and I thought, well, here comes another one. So I just stood there, didn't pay any attention, went along, hopping over, looking for somebody. Most of them had their face down, some friend of mine, and these planes came closer and closer, came down to about 75 or maybe lower, 50 feet, I would say, over the water. And I said, uh-oh, somebody's going to catch hell for flying so low in the yards, because they were not supposed to fly anyone less than 3,000 feet over the Navy Yard. So the planes came in. I thought, oh, well, all I could see, of course, was the propeller and fuselage, and I could see the wing. All of a sudden, they started dropping torpedoes, and I said, man, they're really getting realistic here with their drills. Everybody's still lying there, no strain, no pain. And all of a sudden, of course, I knew how fast those torpedoes were going to come. They go about 50 miles an hour or so underwater. And I thought they were duds, of course. I thought they were just an exercise. And so all of a sudden, of course, the plane, which was going 2 or 3 times as fast as the torpedo, came right over the bow, which is the front of the portion of the ship. I looked up, and I could see then the Japanese insignia on the wings. So I said, oh, this is it. Well, about, I would say, 10 seconds later, the first torpedo hit. I don't know exactly, someplace amidships, because we were a sitting duck there, and they dropped them at maybe 300 yards. So as the plane went over, they had a rear machine gunner in the plane, in these torpedo planes. They had a rear machine gunner, and he opened up. In fact, this was before I even looked up. This is what caused me to look up. He opened up with his machine gun all down the deck. He raked the deck with all of these guys sunbathing with his machine gun. And that's when I looked up and I thought, oh God, is that guy ever going to get in trouble? He accidentally hit that trigger, you know. And that's when I saw the insignia and I knew the war was on. So how many men got killed? I don't know. I saw some there that were writhing, and I made a run for my battle station, which was about amidships in this area and up 2 decks. I was in charge of all the machine guns aboard the USS West Virginia. I had 2 machine guns manned that day, but even the people who were on them really weren't qualified to do a decent job. They weren't regular machine gunners, but who cares? We don't have any war. When we get a threat of war, then, boy, we'll really hit her. So there were several men up there on watch on these 2 machine guns, but we had 13 machine guns which should have been mounted and should have been manned, but they weren't. And so I ran up and I was in charge of the armory. And all my machine guns were sitting there beautifully. We'd had inspection the day before, and I got a plus on my inspection. Everything was great, but machine guns don't do much good sitting in the armory, and there was no possible way that you could ever get them mounted, because clear up to the top here, maybe 100 feet up into the air, carrying one of these huge things, they maybe weigh the best part of 100 pounds, to carry it up there and get it mounted clear up here, 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 and so forth. I mean, it would maybe take you 3 hours just to mount the doggone thing. So we had no guns to fight with. All of the guns, our anti-aircraft guns, 5-inch guns, were along here. There wasn't any ammunition around for them. That was all down 5 or 6 decks below decks in the magazines. So we were sitting there very, very helpless, of course. The first torpedo hit as I was running, and it hit evidently when I had a stiff leg in my run, and up in the air I went, and I came down off balance. Either I was off balance or the ship had moved somewhat. I came down off balance, almost fell down, started running again, and finally got to my battle station, and I said to myself, what the hell do I do now? Here I am, nothing to do but sit here and wait. There wasn't a thing to do, and hope for the best. The torpedoes started hitting. Overall, we took 8 torpedoes, and then all of a sudden I looked up. I don't know, well, all of the oil had been, the millions and millions of barrels of oil which spewed out from all of these ships, which the hulls were punctured, was forming a blanket over the whole of the harbor. And I suppose a thickness of 4 to 8 inches, I don't know, but maybe you make a compromise and say 6 inches of this heavy fuel oil. Now, this isn't oil like you put in your car or you burn at home in your oil heater system. This stuff is just, it's raw crude, which is about the best explanation is something like black tar molasses. So thick that you could turn up a cupful of it and it wouldn't even run out. That's how thick it is. And this was spreading all over, and of course it caught on fire with the various bombs and machine gun tracers and what have you. And the smoke was terrific. In some of these pictures you've seen around, you see smoke on practically every one of them. Back, you can see on the one which is back here that says Pearl Harbor on it, that was Life magazine. I still have that magazine, incidentally. That's my ship. That's the West Virginia, and I was right in the middle. Right in the middle, up about 2 decks. That picture is the following day. That was taken the following day. And it was still burning, of course. But anyway, right directly ahead of us, I would say 50 or 60 feet, was the Oklahoma. Battleship USS Oklahoma. Directly behind us was the Arizona. And several minutes or a few minutes after this attack started, I was looking around wondering what to do. What can I do for an effort here to try and save the ship? I looked forward, and here was the Oklahoma sitting about at an angle of about this already. And she was still moving, and I said, "Stop, stop, you son of a gun, stop." And it kept right on going. And I saw about 1,000 of my friends, many good friends of mine, even some I went through boot training with, upside down. She turned turtle right there. All of those men had it. This certainly didn't do me any good, but it said one thing to me: Buster, don't get caught aboard this thing if it starts over. All of a sudden I looked up in the other direction, and here came a bunch of big bombers. They were two-engine bombers, but two-engine bombers were big in those days. And they came in, and I thought, oh, I hope they're ours, I hope they're ours. They're too high to see any insignias. And they got just above us in a perfect bombing position, and they came right down Battleship Row at, I would say, 7,000 to 8,000 feet. And they let go just like snowflakes. They were dropping 1,500-pound armor-piercing bombs, and they could hardly miss. We took, on the West Virginia, we took 3 of these 1,500-pound bombs. One hit aft, back along on this gun, right on the top of this gun. One hit up here on number 2 turret, and one hit right in here, directly across from maybe 40 feet from where I was. But very fortunately, I said it was a armor-piercing bomb. It went down about, at least 3 decks, maybe more, before it exploded. It had a time fuse, and it didn't explode till it got down far enough that just puffs of smoke and fire and debris came out of the hole. But I was over about 40 feet away. It knocked me down, but I didn't get hit, very fortunately. Very shortly after that, my ship started tilting over. And now to explain just a little bit about what happens. You see, now I was showing you the ship that you can see when you look at a ship sitting in the water. And it's about 100 feet from here to here. But our ship drew, in other words, it sunk down into the water 31 feet. So there was 31 feet of the ship below the surface. And where we were anchored, in here near, we're not anchored, I'm tied up, there was about 50 feet of water, I suppose. So we were maybe around roughly 20 feet above the bottom. We were floating 20 feet above the bottom. So what happened was, now this is a picture from the back, which I drew from the back. My ship was sitting here. Here was the Tennessee. There was a ledge. There was a ledge there. We didn't know this at the time either. But the harbor was out here where all the ships would come and go. We were tied up here, and it was about 20 feet below the bottom, I would estimate. And the ship is very wide. The ledge was in farther, and she went right on over. She didn't settle to the bottom. Luckily, my ship, when it started to roll over, one of the bilge keels, that's one edge of the bottom, over here would be, hit the bottom. It hit the bottom, and she sat there for, I don't know, for a few hours anyway. Most of the men aboard my ship got off, incidentally. Some of my friends got killed. 2 of my very best friends got killed. There's a picture here somewhere. Oops, excuse me. There's a picture. This fella in the middle here, that big guy, he got killed. This was our whaleboat team. And I have the medal here, which I'll have to show you later from that, which was burned up on the ship, but I still have the rest of it. Uh, we didn't lose too many men from my ship because we had time to get off, at least from the bombs or the strafing and so forth. We lost most of our men who made the mistake of diving panic-stricken into the water, into the oil. And first of all, maybe they weren't good swimmers. Second of all, they didn't realize that you cannot swim in oil. There's another picture here of some lad who they pulled out here. This is the way you look once you get into that oil. You can't breathe, and your eyes are clogged up, you can't see. So there's where we lost most of our men, who jumped over the side or dove over the side and could not get to shore. All right, I'm going to have to hustle here, I guess. How many minutes have I got?
20 minutes.
20? Good, that's plenty. All right. This was the reason my ship did not roll over. But I didn't know that at the time. She was over to the point she could go over. And I said, ha-ha, Bailey, don't get caught aboard this thing. So as she started to roll over this side, I started over the other side. So I was down here, and I was a distance of maybe, once it was keeled over, 50 or 60 feet over to the other ship, Tennessee, and there was a whaleboat sitting alongside that was going to take some men ashore, and then when the fighting started, or the shooting started, they just abandoned it, left it sitting there, tied up next to the ship. So I stood down here on the armor belt, which is 16 inches of armor plate right down here. I stood here in that angle, stood on the armor belt, and I thought, how am I going to do this? And as I say, I didn't panic, but I was really shook up, scared to death, in fact. And I said to myself, I can't swim in that oil. And I saw men all over the place, wallowing around. I didn't know who they were. They looked just like a bunch of seals out there in the water, most of them died, I'm sure. I said, I've got to get through that oil somehow and swim over that whaleboat. And then I can reach up, because the gunwale's about this high. I can reach up, I can get in that boat, and then I can go aboard the Tennessee. So I thought I'll slide down, park the oil with my feet as I go, which I did. Slid down the side, kicked off my shoes, and I thought, I'm going to swim underwater. That's the only way. And I was a good swimmer. I was on the swimming team, and I was a good swimmer, luckily. I thought, I'm going to swim underwater. But about 3 things happened that I didn't anticipate. One, of course, was that with all that black oil on the top, you couldn't see down there. It was just as black as a closet. And so I lost my directions right away. The second thing was Pearl Harbor was just one big bucket of slop, human garbage from a big city, maybe a city of 50,000, with all these ships dumped the human waste right into the harbor. And it was just like thick soup down under there. So this, of course, nauseated me. The third thing I didn't realize was that I thought I was going to have a big breath when I got down there, and I was going to go all the way with one breath underwater. And I don't think I got 2 strokes. I kicked off from the bottom, started in the general direction where I thought I was going, and I couldn't see, but I was out of breath before I knew it. So I thought, I got to get up, and I went to the top, and I started splashing as I came up, took a quick breath. I didn't get any oil, at least. I'm sure I got in the oil, but I didn't get full of oil and didn't get in my mouth and nose and what have you. Down I went again, and I would say 10 strokes, typical underwater swim strokes, and the most beautiful, pleasant feeling I ever felt in my life. My head went bonk right against the bottom of that whaleboat. I could feel it all the way down, just like a spring, clear down my spine. But I was the happiest man in the world, I'll tell you, because I had hit just within several feet of where I had anticipated I was going to arrive. I pulled myself up through the oil, of course. Then I looked like this guy. And I got in a whaleboat, and as I ran along, whaleboats are big. I ran along, and I reached out, and as I say, there was all these people wallowing around in there. I went along, and I'd grab so-and-so by the hair, and I'd pull him in, let him get his hand on the edge. I went down, pulled in 4 or 5, and I said, pull in some more as you go. Okay. Up on the Tennessee I went, and then I had to run all the way with a similar ship. I came aboard about here, and I had to run all the way up here, which was about 50, 60 yards, I suppose, and I was in my stocking feet. And the whole deck was covered with glass from, anything of bulletin boards, light globes, clocks, various things, anything that had glass, even our searchlights. The glass was splintered all over the deck. And here I was running along for trying to get to some safety from the bombs and the torpedoes and the strafing. The strafing is what really scared me. And I was maybe halfway there, and I saw a dead officer lying there, and with his shoes on, of course. I said, ha ha, there's a pair of number 11s, just what I need. I maybe took 5 seconds, and I jerked off his shoes, continued on in, and I got into below the superstructure here, and put on the shoes. First of all, my feet were bleeding considerably, but that didn't hurt, didn't bother me. And I said, now what are you going to do? You're not helping in a battle. By this time, the Tennessee had gotten some guns firing, and they were shooting up a storm up there. The only thing was, there was so much smoke, you couldn't see. You couldn't see 20 feet. Just smoke. All you could do was hear. You'd hear a plane coming in here, strafing, da-da-da-da-da-da-da, come in strafing, and they'd train around with these big 5-inch guns with a, 18-foot barrel this big around, with fire a 5-inch shell, which maybe weighed 54 pounds, I think. And they'd say, hey, I think there's one over here. Train around, boom, let her go, you know. Just hoping through the smoke you'd hit something. Well, there was nothing else to do. You were sitting there, sitting duck, and it made you feel better to think you were fighting back. Well, as I came up onto the elevated deck, the anti-aircraft battery, I was qualified on the anti-aircraft battery on the West Virginia and had the same guns on the Tennessee. And everybody was coughing and choking, and the first loader would have to pick up a shell over here. They were about this long, because the powder and the shell itself, the projectile, were connected, just like a .22 shell or something. They were connected. And you'd have to pick them out of the fuse pots, which set the nose fuse so it would go off at a certain time, throw it into the loading tray, then they would ram it home and then fire. This guy was choking and spuming it, and he had a shell in his hand, and he had the nose down, and he had it down here like this. He was going, oh, oh, and there were guys heaving all over the place. And I said, well, he's had it. So I said, get out of here. And I jumped up there, and I took his place. So I grabbed the first shell, swung around to load it, and as I swung around, I saw the barrel sticking up there, which was beautifully painted, you know, as I say, a big barrel. And it was so hot by this time from all the firing that there were big bubbles, blisters, with fire shooting out of the blisters. And I said to the gun captain, who was right this far away from me, I had this shell, and he says, load! I said, how about that barrel? He says, to hell with the barrel, load. I thought, oh, what the hell. I'll maybe get it sooner or later here anyway. That strafing's going to get me. Maybe we can knock one down. So I loaded her and rammed her, and away she went. Luckily, it didn't blow up. But the next one I got, I picked up the shell, and I'm holding it here, and here came a plane in, and I could hear it, and it sounded like it was right on top of me. And we went da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, and I flinched, you know, and I took that shell, which I should have hid over here, and held it up like this as a shield to shield me against that strafing. These are the stupid things you do instinctively. And but I didn't get hit. Well, the battle ended, supposedly. It seemed like about 3 days, but I guess it lasted about 2 hours or shortly after. 2 waves of ships. There was 183 in the first wave and 150 in the second wave that came in. And every one of them emptied their entire load right on all of these anchored ships or tied up ships, sitting there practically helpless. Out of the 283 planes, either we shot down 25, I think 25, or we could have, if I'd have had a sack of spuds, I could have knocked them down, I think 25 of them. But by the time people got their guns manned and into operation, it was practically all over. Incidentally, we had detected a group of planes coming in, maybe, in fact, it was the Japs, maybe an hour before they arrived. But at the same moment, at 8 o'clock, about 8 o'clock, there was supposed to be a bunch of bombers coming in from the States to reinforce our bastion in Hawaii. And the people on the radar knew this, of course, and they thought, well, that bunch of planes, well, they just got lost. They're 100 miles off course or something, and that's our own planes. And this is how it happened that they came in on us by complete surprise. If we'd have had 20 minutes, we'd have shot them down like flies. Very little, if any, damage. But as it was, practically our whole fleet was destroyed. All of our heavy fleet. We had no aircraft carriers in there, very fortunately. And all of our small ships were saved. And this is what we did the fighting with from there on out. I missed one of the most important points that you want to hear about. Before I got over the side, I was running aft to start over the side when I abandoned ship. The Arizona was right behind us. I saw her blow up. Hundreds of feet into the air went bodies, arms, legs, heads, guns, parts of deck, wood, everything, and smoke and fire up in the air, several hundred feet, I would say. And she was so badly damaged, they never did clear the harbor of her. Normally they want to clear any harbor to get them out of there, for one thing. But she was so badly damaged, they thought it would take years, and they would never be able to recommission her. So they finally made a memorial. And I have a picture of that here somewhere also. In fact, I have, maybe you have it. Here is the memorial they built over it, all of concrete. If this was a little more closed, smaller class, I could show you the pictures of the Pearl Harbor story here. But I stayed aboard the Tennessee about a week, I guess. I lost track of time, to tell you the truth. Then I got transferred over to the base, and the same day I went aboard a destroyer and stayed there for the rest of, well, not the rest of the war. The last year of the war, I fortunately came home. But aboard that destroyer, I don't know, as I say, I should add all this stuff up too. I maybe had about 25 ship-to-ship and ship-to-plane battles on that, all through the fighting in the South Pacific. I was in the Battle of Midway, but we never fired a shot, luckily. In fact, most of the ships did not. The aircraft carriers were the only ones involved in the Battle of Midway, and submarines. But where all of the really tough fighting took place was when we had anywhere from 3 to 10 ships. We'd have a task force with 3 destroyers. That would be our task force. And we'd go out either looking for the Japs or attack them when we knew they were coming, of course. And we knew they had maybe 5 times as much as we had, bigger ships, heavier ships, and many more of them, and we would attack with 3. Many battles I was in, we had only 3 ships. Every ship in my squadron was sunk except my ship. The USS Ralph Talbot was a destroyer. And usually we would lose one, at least one, but we might get 4 or 5 of the Japs. And all of our battles were at night, except the aircraft battle. The planes would come in during the day. But all of our battles were at night, practically every battle. Battle of Midway was not. But that was mostly aircraft versus ships, as I say. So I finished the war on the Ralph Talbot until I finally got back on dry land in 1944. The war ended in 45. One more little story before I have some questions. The captain of my ship, who was a lovable man, a fine personnel, very humane person, he was aboard ship. When all this started happening, he raced to the bridge, hoping to get the ship untied from the Tennessee and maybe get it underway and get it out to sea. But it was too late. It maybe take 45 minutes to even get up enough steam to get it underway. But he was running around the bridge, still giving commands, trying to tell the guns to start firing, and of course nobody could fire, though he had no ammunition. And he was running around the bridge. There were a few other officers up there with him. One of these big bombs, the one which I said hit forward, a large shell splinter from this bomb took him right across the belly. All of his intestines from this huge slit fell out. He reached down and he was carrying him in his arms, still running around, attempting to give orders to command his ship. Finally, it was on fire to the point, and it was obvious that we couldn't get underway. He lay down on the deck and he said, "Abandon ship, save yourselves, leave me, and God be with you." And then he died. He got the Congressional Medal of Honor, incidentally, posthumously. But this was the Pearl Harbor story. Questions? I know I left out a lot of things, I'm sure, because, as I say, I work without notes. I get going and I get ahead of myself and behind. But I think it's more spontaneous this way. Yes?
How old were you when
Well, I was 22. I was 22 at the time.
Now, out of all those ships, almost all of them went down, or were...
Well, most of these ships, incidentally, as I say, it wasn't very deep there. They either counter-flooded. The ones that took all these torpedoes, and they'd counter-flood so they would sink straight down, and only had 20 feet to go before they hit bottom. So they sat on the bottom. Within several years, they raised all of these ships except the Arizona, and they put them all back in commission except the Oklahoma, of course. She rolled over and she had it. And the Utah, they did not recommission her. But all the rest, they got back in the war. In the last 6 months of the war, I think practically everyone got back in and did some fighting. They got refitted. Took a long, long time, but they practically redid the entire ship in every case. And so we came on from a big loser to the eventual winner, I'm very happy to say. And I didn't get a scratch outside of my feet getting cut the first day, and I got hit by a gun which was recoiling one time on the shoulder. Luckily, I kind of was riding with the punch, because those guns recoil, you know, like this far. And I happened to be standing behind one time, and it came back and hit me. But nothing that would give me a Purple Heart. I never claimed that I was wounded or anything of this nature. So I came out of it all right, healthy and hearty. Okay, one more question?
How did all the rest of the people on the ship get to the other one?
Most of them got into, one fella is all I know other than me who swam across. And many others got around. They jump over at a certain point where the oil either wasn't so deep or wasn't on fire or something, and he swam all the way, this one fellow swam all the way over to Ford Island here. In fact, he's a good friend of mine. He lives in up in Stillwater. But that day we lost 2,600 men overall. Not off my ship, overall, 2,600. And it was all useless. As I say, if the president would have given us 20 minutes of warning, we would have had practically no